My name is Yildiz. I work for Lloyd Register. I'm the technical lead for the Czech project. I'll tell you a bit about what we have done overall, but also this presentation will be mainly about how we can use our learnings for the global fleet. So you've seen this layer cake, which Suvi very kindly explained to us, but how the foresight fits in, I just wanted to demonstrate it to you. A part of our work was to look into framework conditions, which actually prepared all the other Czech technologies to build upon their models. And above all of that, we also wanted to make this more relevant for the whole industry. So we didn't want to be in isolation, which is why there's that circle around the layer cake. Because what it's trying to do, take all those learnings for that two ship and those technologies and then extrapolate it for the global fleet for the future. It's obviously a prediction, but I will tell you how the future looks. So to do that, first we wanted to look at the global fleet. So we wanted to predict what the global fleet may look like in 2030, 40 and 50. And you'll see those references throughout my presentation. And we used existing studies. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. It's also time limitations and so on. So we used, for these particular cases, we wanted to first project transport work and also efficiency improvements. And we looked into different segments. So like I said, not only the bulk carrier and the cruise ship that we're talking about, but looking at it from a global fleet perspective for those decades. So each decade then we projected what the transport work and what the efficiency improvements in percentage may look like in those years to come. With that, we also wanted to understand what would be the energy demand per ship type and what would maybe the fuel mix going forward. Like I said, this is a projection, but we need to have that insight in certain level to be able to extrapolate our learnings to the future. So taking those learnings or projections into account, that fed into our further work. That's how we started extrapolating the savings. So first of all, this slide is quite informative, and this is what basically comes from Mia's direction, her team. So the FPV, which she talked about just before me, those savings in percentage when we think about the Czech technologies in question, which you will hear a lot about after lunch. But in summary, basically, for each segment, we were projecting these may be the savings going forward. And again, those savings are relevant for the study going for the foresight. So taking all those into account, the transport work, efficiency improvements, energy demand and fuel mix, we then estimated these values for the well-to-wake greenhouse gas emissions without and with Czech technologies. So the writings may be little, but hopefully you'll get the gist of it. The tall ones are obviously without the Czech technologies, and the shorter ones are with the Czech technologies. And looking at it for each decade, so 2030, 40 and 50. Okay, so this is looking at it from a whole well-to-wake perspective. So you can see that decrease, and that's very promising, and that's what we want to see. That tells us that the learnings from the Czech technologies and those improvements could be reflected to the global fleet, and it could be very promising for our industry. We also wanted to see this for tank-to-wake. Okay. So again, that's also very promising. You can see the taller columns are without Czech technologies and the shorter ones are with the Czech technologies, and looking at it from a tank-to-wake perspective. And again, 2030, 40 and 50. So with that, what we also wanted to then demonstrate, how would this turn into a cost exercise? Because whether we like it or not, the industry is interested in that cost element. And we wanted to show that the abated CO2, how much would be a saving for the industry, again, for the global fleet. So then we started taking these learnings to the next level. By the way, I must stress that this is not just Lloyd Register's work, this is a partnership. So I have to let you know that this great work is actually coming from my good partners from WMU, Tuan and Alessandro. So I forgot to mention that. So the cost of CO2 then becomes this. First, we want to see cost of future fuels. We need to understand that before we take all those learnings with those tall bars and shorter bars with the colors and everything. We need to make sure that we understand what may be the future fuels cost will be. And again, we looked into it from existing literature from those decades, 30, 40 and 50 perspective, and for different alternative fuels. And of course, that dotted line that going upwards, that tells you the carbon price. So that information, again, feeds into the model to be able to inform us what would be the abated CO2 may look like. So with that, we then come out with this, which tells you the fuel mix for going forward. So again, we're looking at two scenarios, which is the checked scenario, and also we wanted to pick a neutral scenario for that going forward fuel mix may look like. And you may remember that in my early slide, there was the fuel mix, and that's actually based on IEA's scenario study. So we've taken that as a neutral piece. So this will be the future fuels in terms of usage going forward. But we also wanted to reflect that on the check scenario. And the way we wanted that, obviously those fuels that mentioned previously by Mia. So we focused a little bit higher on the biofuels and also the green hydrogen for obvious reasons that you may remember her presentation. So the IEA scenario and check scenario is very similar for fuel mix, but one of them is a little bit more focused on biofuel and green hydrogen. And that learning then took us to the final slide, which then looks into that comparison of cost for IEA fuel mix scenario versus the Czech's fuel mix scenario. And you can see that difference, hopefully, that makes sense, that cost of fuels, so operational perspective, and also the CO2 perspective, that does look a little bit more promising going forward. So hopefully, like I said, although we are mainly focusing on environmental reasons for decarbonisation, but we must also remember that the cost plays a big element, and therefore that needs to be also reflected. So that maybe was quite a quick presentation, but I think hopefully I managed to go through within a reasonable speed so that you manage to consume that. And thank you for everyone for listening and for your attention.